Well, excellent. That brings us to the end of what the genius pattern in terms of playing with that script and using that script and moving there. What we'd like to now do is some other things around trance. Since time itself is one of these matrices of the mind, and time itself does not exist out there in the world, the only thing that exists are events, and events happening. And some events have happened, some are happening, some will happen. And as we rise up in our mind to notice that, we can make comparisons. And make comparisons between what has happened and what is happening. We measure time on this planet by how fast the planet turns into light and shadow around the sun. We measure how long that takes to go around the sun in an orbit. And so we measure the events that's occurring on the planet by those events. So we measure one event by another event. Sometimes we measure things in terms of the pulse that we have, or the rhythm, or a pattern. So time at the primary level is rhythm, or pattern, or movement, or events of some sort. And then we measure it, but all that is a conceptual state. So time as a conceptual state, time does not exist. And the only time that exists is this moment. And what we call the past only exists in our minds, and as we've encoded it and kept it, because a lot of things just vanish away and we can't remember it. And sometimes it can be frustrating. We talk with old friends and they say, "Do you remember then?" And no, not really. I don't remember. And sometimes it's surprising when we look at photographs and I don't remember being there. Or you look at old journals. I don't remember writing that. Or who is that person there? So that we forget. When Penfield in the 1950s opened up a brain and started putting electrical stimuli there, he drew the conclusion. He jumped to the conclusion that everything that we've ever experienced is encoded and is in there somewhere. But I think he jumped to a conclusion. And a lot of the neurosciences now call that into question, that we forget. We delete. Oh yes, deletion. We deleted it out in the first place. That everything isn't encoded, and that we do have a good forgetter. In fact, having a good forgetter inside of our heads can keep us sane and healthy and developing better maps for the future, because one of the worst ways to find out what did happen is your memory. Because we now know, and there's been all kinds of tests about how we can fool around with memory. And of course, trance is a great changer of memory, which is why someone under hypnosis, and only a few people go under hypnosis, can't testify in court. No, I've been hypnotized. Okay, your testimony doesn't count. Well, I've never been hypnotized. Yeah, really. So memory is a construct. And how we've constructed it, what is left of it, and how that every time you pull out a memory from your memory banks and one of those videos and you think about it, you're changing it. So that's why Richard says it's never too late to have a happy childhood, because we can change it. Because how we think about it and how we store it back in then becomes the updated videotape in our arcade of videotapes in our mind. So now as we think about the power of trance to change our history, and in your training manuals we put in there the change history pattern with metastates, and the decision destroyer, and some of those time-lining effects. But we want to do some new and some different things that I think you'll have fun with. And we can't cover all the patterns we put in the book, but we'd like to cover fast and slow time. We'd like to do spinning resources in time. We'd like to do having more patience now. And
okay.
Because these are once again just concepts of time. And if you looked at that complex chart that Bob and I put in timelining, you'll see the 16 different kinds of times. I spent about a year and a half just reading everything I could on time and the concepts of time and methodological time and mathematical time and psychological time and just lots of different facets of concepts of time. But we want to start with linguistic timelining. And in your book, it's on page 80, linguistic timelining. One of the persons who's done a lot of research and a lot of writing in this is Paul Riker. he says narrative is the guardian of time. So I'd like to start with something conceptual and linguistic, and we'll play with this, and we'll play with the linear nature of timeline as narrative, as story, which leads to several new fields that have risen in the last decade or 15 years, from narrative therapy to brief psychotherapy and some of the other therapies that work with linguistic timelining. And the point is that we really can't build a glorious future on the bruises of the past.
Well, there's a mixed metaphor.
So if I'm in a state that I've been bruised, and I build all the matrix of my mind around that bruise, around that wound, around that hurt, around that trauma, around that disappointment, around that depression, around some event of our life, and we build it around it, it's hard to build a glorious future around a bruise of the past. So what we want to do is to clean out some of those bruises and find some sparkling events that we haven't storied yet. So there's two sections in here, and we don't have it at the beginning of this pattern. We're rearranging that now. The paragraph that starts, we tell stories. We all tell stories. The narratives we tell about the events of our life can transform and heal or traumatize and destroy. The narratives we tell summarize the days of our lives. And we use various scripts, plots, themes to frame the days of our lives. The narrative as a linguistic form is not without importance, because what it mostly does, in one word, it can set and anchor a meta-level belief system and keep us in distress, or limit our choices, or create an empowering meta frame. So what is the story of your life in one word? What is the story of your life in one word? If we made a movie of your life, if we made a sitcom, or a drama, or a melodrama, or a game show, or what would be the theme, the thematic facet of your life? Would it be hero in search of adventure? Would it be victim? Would it be clown? Would it be Jerry Steinfeld kind of a, we build this whole show around nothing? Nothing means anything, but we can spend a whole half hour doing this nothingness. What would be the theme of your life? And so this is how we do narrative, as we think about what are the narratives, what are the stories that have been given to me? How have people storied me? And do I like the story? Do I want to live out this plot? Do I want to live out this script? And so the story of our life. When we use a one-word, or one-term phrase, or a short phrase to summarize the meaning of our life, we can create a very limiting map. We can also create a very empowering map. It just depends upon that. So White and Epstein, in their 1990 book, Narrative Therapy, describes our lives as stories. We live stories. And oftentimes we need to be de-storied or restoried so that we can stop telling the old story and tell ourselves some new stories. And so the question there is, do you need your narrative restoried? Over on page 81, there's some more introductory things. Narrative as time. Narrative time is linear. The episodic nature of narrative draws narrative time as a direction on a linear representation of time. And we do that by saying, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then, and then, and then. So it sets up a sequence and a linear process. This is 81 at the top. So this just describes the way we put a story together, and in this way we narrate our lives by sequencing and punctuating events, and in doing so we selectively pick and choose events, delete other events, punctuate them in various ways. So this punctuation, this classification, is part of that meaning-making matrix of what are you storying? And so then we put all that together. Here's what Riker says about this narrative and how it operates as a guardian of our times. The power of a story is that it encodes events on a large level format or frame so that then it becomes difficult to change. It solidifies it. It solidifies it, and so all the events fit into that frame. When we create a narrative or story, we impose a structure on the events of life that enables us to group them together in various ways, and then this provides rules for eliminating other stories. So the very first step of this whole process is discovering our story. So at the very top of page 80, what story have you lived now? Who storied your life? Is it part of a cultural story, a racial story, a religious story, a family story? How much of the story did you personally buy? How much of it did you create? Tell about the theme of your life and listen to the narrative story. What kind of narrating is it? Do you tell a story of victimhood or survival, of failing or winning, of connecting or disconnecting, of being loved or being rejected? And so this is what we want to do. And to help you, at the bottom of page 80, there's 3 of these little helpers, these sentence stems that you can fill in. Up until now, the story of my life has been a story comprised of... If I were to describe the plot of the narrative of my life that has been enacted so far, it is a soap opera, a drama, a tragedy, a melodrama. Up until now, I have thought and felt and acted and believed and then described the story that you've experienced so far. So what we want to do is give you a moment, just do some writing, and you might want to write in the book, or you might want to just get a sheet of blank paper and just kind of let it flow in terms of setting this frame. If it's a narrative, what is the narrative? How has it been played out? Who storied you? Do you like the story? What story do you tell of the events of your life? And as you do that, just notice what your mind does in terms of grabbing events and how we grab events and we label events. We have thoughts and feelings about those events. And this is that meaning-making process that creates that matrix of time, of how we narrate. And as you do that narration, you may notice if it's your voice doing the narration, if it's a parent's voice doing the narration, a friend's voice doing the narration, or maybe a cultural voice that's doing the narration. What is the story? So being able to flesh out the story and then to start evaluating, do I even like this story? And how has it been storied, and what is it like? And so identifying the stories. What have you found so far? What is the stories that you've been told? And the stories of life that maybe be useful, maybe not be so useful. First of all, just identifying some of the stories, because sometimes this gives the rest of us ideas about different stories that we've been told. Every time we meet a client, a customer, a patient, that person has got a story. And oftentimes, that's their problem. And so as we can de-story and re-story, deframe and reframe, we can linguistically create a new timeline for where we've been, where we're going. A lot of stories are stories of journeys. I came from, I'm here, and here's where I'm going. A lot of them are journey stories. Anybody got journey stories? Okay. And so we think of our lives like a trip, like a journey. Yeah, what kind of trip you been on? and a lot of times the story is a story of some of the cultural values. To become a somebody, to prove myself, to get all the love I didn't get. Sometimes those are the stories. Alfred Adler tells a wonderful story in his biography. Alfred Adler, of course, being the second person to Sigmund Freud, and Alfred Adler, as a little boy, was running around the house. He was 13, 14 years old. I think he was 8 or 9 years old. And he passed a room the sitting room where his dad and another gentleman were talking, and he overheard them saying, and it must have been a schoolmaster or somebody, said, well, little Alfred, he just doesn't have what it takes to really succeed intellectually. And he overheard that, and it became a story. And part of his story was, I'll show you. Well, of course, he creates a whole form of psychology, Adlerian psychology, individual psychology. And in Adlerian psychology, one of the most important things for diagnosis is, what are some of the earlier memories? Because maybe that sets a frame, and maybe that creates a story. And of course, Alfred Adler, the other thing that he invented was inferiority complex. I mean, he was the one who invented that phrase. And his psychology is every person is trying to overcome inferiority. Well, of course, it's his story, and his psychology, Adlerian psychology, touches the lives of all of us because, to some extent, it's part of our story. But the stories of our lives and the things that have happened and what you've said about it, what others have said about it, The stories of our lives. My mom and dad were very quiet, reserved people, and they adopted a little girl when I must have been 4 years old. And in those years, social services had absolute power. So they had the little girl 18 months, and one day Mom got a call to social services were going to come and take the little girl away from them because the mother wanted the little girl again. Well, this was just devastating, and my mother had no resources for coping with it. And so I just have some memories of her just being in total despair, and a little bit later, her going to a mental hospital. But Dad didn't want to burden us with that problem, so I never heard the story. And it wasn't until I was adult, and I said, Dad, tell me the story. Well, then he said they didn't know which one should go to the mental hospital, him or her, because they were both distraught. But Mom was more distraught. And, of course, during those years, they didn't have talk therapy, so they just zapped her with chemicals. And when that didn't work, they zapped her brain with electric shock treatments. She had 21 electric shock treatments. Well, I was never heard this, but I was raised by a dad who took care of the 3 boys of us, so that was some of my story. But my story was, life's mysterious. People don't tell you things. You got to find out. So it became part of my narrative, part of my story, to find out. And why do bad things happen? And that exploration. So we all have stories, and out of our stories, sometimes we create a story that becomes a narrative that's okay to live out. And sometimes we create a story, or someone gives us a story, and it's not okay to live out. Because it puts us on playing out a script that someone else has played that's not really going to serve us well. And so being able to identify our story and recognize, oh, that's how the narrative has been created, and then quality control it, enables us to really take charge of the narratives of our lives so that we can start choosing the futures we want to build. And so your stories are some of the things that you find as you think about the narratives of life. Anybody?
I'll start. Not measuring up.
Not measuring up. So there's a story. And there's a story that probably a lot of us can tell. We can think about events in school where maybe we were the smallest one on the team, or when we weren't picked. So we take these events and we narrate about them. It doesn't. And the fascinating thing about linguistic timelining is that we just chose some events. But we didn't choose all events because there's a lot of other events that we didn't choose to narrate. In fact, that creates a whole realm of new narratives that can be created. What is unstoried? And we'll talk about that a little bit.
One of my earliest recalls, I was about 4 years old. That was back in the days when the grocery store would send somebody to your house for the groceries. And one day he came in, drove up our driveway, left the car running, or the truck running, and I got into it. And somehow got it into reverse. And the only thing that saved me was a rock wall and a tree. So after that, I'm somebody special.
That you're someone special?
Special, yeah.
You narrated that.
Got saved rather than killed. Which is the other option, because it could very easily have been killed.
Yeah.
I could have identified with that. I remember very clearly one time bringing home a 98 on a test, and my mother asked me, why did you get 100?
Uh-huh. So that's how some of the stories get started. Why didn't you bring 100? What's wrong with you that you didn't get those other 2 points? Yeah, so the narratives of life.
Story of an explorer.
Of an explorer.
Zipping around.
Okay. Sometimes we will watch a cartoon or an imaginary person we've read in a book, and that becomes a story of our life. I read to my daughter Jessica every night at supper for 3 or 4 years the Nancy Drew series. So that part of the story that she could start to build is being an intelligent woman, a detective, someone exploring life, finding out things that people can't find, seeing things and having all those resources. Well, she wrote a little manuscript 2 years ago, a murder mystery, and she was really proud of that. She went to school, and every day she'd come ask me different things about how to poison people without getting caught. I said, "Why do you want this exactly?" It's for my novel. It's for my novel.
We're glad you're still here.
We're glad we're still here.
You ever feel woozy?
So the stories we tell, the experiences we've had.
A story of highlights.
Of highlights? Say some more about that.
Just as you look back, looking at all the positive things and forgetting things that you didn't want to, just so it's a story of highlights.
Okay. Other stories? Other dramas? Sometimes asking the question, if it was a drama, if we were going to make a play out of this, what kind of a play would this be? I remember seeing a biography on Jim Carrey on TV, one of the Discovery channels, and how that his mom and dad just teased and played and teased and played, and they played games about who can make the silliest faces, silliest voices, and this becomes a story.
You got the best of both, apparently.
And so it's out of the events of life that we do that. The fascinating thing is that the events that have occurred to us and the ones that we remembered and the ones that we've storied, the ones that we've created some narrative for, are not the only events that happen. There's a lot of events that are unstoried. Sparkling events, maybe just moments. We might call these the exceptions to the rule or the counterexamples. And we can call those forth and story them, because while somebody may have a story of pain and distress, and their story is life is a journey through a vale of tears, people do that. We can say, was there ever a time when you were happy? Well, most of the time they'll say, I can't think of a single time. So there's never a time when you were. Oh yeah, there was a time. Just one? Was there another time? Did you ever do it? And we start bringing forth and cultivating a new story so that we can story that and narrate that and build life around something positive instead of building a life around something negative. So the thing about the matrix is that if we start with an event and then give it meaning, and the event is negative, and we build our lives around something traumatic, then that creates an overall narrative of life is a trauma. And so as we narrate our lives and create new narratives, there's a process by which we can do that. Who's got a narrative, a story that you're not all that pleased with? It's the way things have gone up till now, and you'd like to have a new story. You'd like to have something narrated that would be a better story, and you can just repackage maybe the old story so that it's not so it's not available for replaying again and again in the same ways.
What?
We were just asking who's got something like that. Because I do want to do a demo up here and take something and just play it through with this linguistic timelining process. And what we'll do is to create some new narratives that we can create for ourselves or for others. So what we're going to do in a little bit is to let everybody get an experience with linguistic timelining. And what we're going to do, the pattern is really just having a conversation that allows us to take those sparkling moments that we haven't narrated into existence and narrate some new stories, and to de-story some of the old stories, and we'll use some of the things from narrative therapy to play with that, as well as some of the things from NLP and neurosemantics. So what I'd like to do is to find someone who'd like to be a demonstration subject, and we will do that. So you want to do that? Okay. So first of all, the story. What would you call the story? What is the story?
Going it alone.
Going it alone.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the story, and you've got evidence and events that you've labeled that way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The first questions here, as we explore this, who storied you that way?
I think it resulted from experiences.
Okay.
Going through life and putting myself out, and the connections just not happening.
Okay, so you did it.
I got it.
This is the meaning and the way you've storied those events.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no one else told you this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so who storied it? And that goes to the question: is this also the story of a mother, a father, of family, of culture? Is this a familiar story, or did you invent a whole new story just for yourself, going it alone?
It might have some roots in earlier experiences of just lack of acceptance from Mom and just taking off, having a strong sense of something I needed to do and just going and doing that and having to go against the grain and totally fight my way out of very limiting, constricting structures.
Okay, so that's part of the story. That's part of how it's all been narrated, to fight my way out of something that wasn't very pleasant.
Yeah.
Okay. What was their story? If you were to summarize in one word or phrase, what was their story?
Mom was a fundamentalist Christian, very constricted, and it felt totally fake and unreal and unnatural.
Okay. So her story was, you've got to be right about everything, and life is all about getting right and finding everything that's wrong, or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just the whole model associated with the Bible.
Okay.
Which I didn't identify with.
Okay.
Any of the Semitic books, or Quran or Bible or whatever.
Okay.
I just totally do not relate to.
So that story was the religious story.
Yeah.
That story is life is about everything is a moral issue.
Yeah. Black and white.
The black and white
Absolutism.
story.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's what you fought out.
Yeah.
And when you fought out, then somehow part of it was going alone.
Yeah.
Not going with family. No family support. So that's some of that story there. When you answer the question, up until now, my life has been a story comprised of going alone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not finding that connection.
Not finding, and so if it was a journey, it's a journey to
find that connection.
Find that connection.
Yeah.
Okay. If you were to describe the plot of the narrative, what is the plot?
Finding the connection.
And so will the movie end with a happy ending?
I don't know.
What have you narrated so far? Is it possible?
I've made tremendous amounts of effort.
Okay.
Yeah. Approaching and developing my ability to establish rapport and
Okay.
all that.
Okay. So the narrative plot is still unfinished. We haven't narrated exactly how you anticipated. So step 2, and this is the quality control place where we kind of step back from that narrative that you've created. Do you like that narrative? Going alone, seeking to find connection?
No, it'd be nice to just find it and get on to the next stage of my life.
Okay. So we're going to ask questions like evaluating the usefulness of this old story, the productivity of the story, the value of the story, the emotional enjoyment of the story. How would you evaluate those facets?
Being alone sucks, and it takes tremendous amounts of time and energy away from just getting focused on or just really enjoying a connection, and then having the extra energy and resources to focus on my work and go forward with that.
Okay. So what we're doing at this point is really giving you the ability to step back from it and evaluate it, and maybe say, I've had enough of that story. I don't need to narrate it that way anymore. Because it seems to me that sometimes the stories, they get storied, and it's one of those unconscious frames, the logical level of story, and we just don't even question it. It just seems like, well, that's the way it is, because that's what's happened. But once you're ready to look at that, then we ask the question, do you need a new narrative? And if you were to write a new narrative, what would be the new story that you'd like to write?
Probably actually finding that connection.
Okay, find a connection.
Yeah.
So that might be a new story. And if you wrote that one, what would be the next story?
Companionship and exploring together.
Okay, so exploring together would be the next narrative we could create. So step 3 is making up this new story that would be more empowering. From this day on, I will increasingly develop more into a person who
makes that connection.
Makes that connection.
But I wonder if it's possible,
Okay,
because life hasn't proved that.
so far.
Yeah.
So what we now want to do is to begin to explore that. And so what I've written here in the text is just for the fun of it, make up a wild and woolly story. Use your pretender to the fullest extent, the as-if frame, the pretender frame, because it may not be true, but if it could be true, or if you could just pretend like it was true for a moment, what would be the most positive and bright story that you could create about finding connection and exploring with an associate, with a partner?
What would that story be? Probably like meeting or connecting with somebody. I think I'm most strongly drawn to women from like parts of the world like Sri Lanka and India, and someone that has that openness and just exploring different countries, and at times coming back and working very intently and having like kind of mutually supportive work where there's like an enriching and sharing. And,
Okay. Has there ever been a moment when you caught a glimpse of that?
Briefly.
Briefly.
Yeah.
So what would a brief moment of catching a glimpse or experiencing just a part of that be like?
Feeling that exchange, that companionship, that someone is there and wants to be with you, and feeling that sense of being part of something.
So when have you had even just a glimpse of that?
And just a few relationships in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go back to those events, because those are probably the unstoried events. Those are the ones that you had that sparkling moment. You had that exception, but you haven't made that your story. And somehow it's outside the story. And so for just a moment, build a story upon those.
What if there was like maybe enough ambiguity and maybe too much ambiguity where, you know, it wasn't just cleanly, totally a positive experience?
Right. So what we want to do is to get the parts that were valuable, that was positive, that was useful, and start to build it around those. There's that sparkling moment, and it may have just lasted for a moment, but it gave you a sense of a vision, of an understanding, of a goal, of a pathway, that if you began storing it that way, that this is what calls me forth, this is what brings out my best, this is the exception to what I generally have experienced, and that's what I want. Then what would be some of those features that you pull out, and if you build a story around it, what would that be like?
The intimacy and being able to talk about different things, having someone from a different culture where you're stretched into, you know, you're being in a new country and you're seeing new experiences or having new experiences.
So that sounds like a story you'd like to live.
Yeah.
That'd be if we made that into a movie, that'd be a movie you'd like to star in.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, but you've lived another one, and the other one has gotten in the way. So let's externalize that. Let's externalize it from mind and heart and emotions and put it out there. And the old story is, I'm never finding anyone. Or however you want to phrase it. And in fact, let's externalize it. And if it was a person or an object or an event, what would we call that? That might be a good one-word summary for that.
Alone.
Alone. So alone has really been bothering you.
Yeah.
And alone has not let you have the kind of life you'd really like to have.
Right.
And alone has tricked you and deceived you and played havoc with your emotions and your mind. Have you had enough of alone?
Yeah.
Are you going to let alone keep playing these tricks on you?
I hope not.
Okay. So how does alone do this? How does alone trick you and pull you and play with you and recruit you for the games it wants to play?
It seems like the circumstances perpetuated the external circumstance.
And so this is part of the deception of alone, that alone tricks you into thinking that it's the circumstances that do it. So that's one of its tricks.
Yeah.
Because if you can catch all the tricks of alone, then we can come up with a strategy to defeat alone. Because alone's got some tricks and some stratagems that have worked against you. So one of it is saying, oh, it's the circumstances. What are some of the other tricks of alone?
But even if I put myself out there and I don't get the reciprocal response, it's still.
Okay. So let's give that a name. If I put out a response and I don't get a reciprocal response back in the way I want it, let's give that a name.
Non-reciprocation.
Non-reciprocation. So as you think about non-reciprocation,
non-connecting.
Non-connecting. So non-reciprocation, non-connecting. These have been problems that have recruited you into thinking that they're the boss of you.
Yeah.
Have you had enough of non-reciprocation and non-connecting?
Sure.
And so how do they trick you? How do they get you to play their game?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
Okay.
It just seemed like just my internal emotional response to circumstance that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, as I step back from it, it sounds like one non-reciprocation means non-reciprocation. It's like you take one and it grows into this big...
Sounds like thousands.
But you have many thousands.
Yeah.
So if today you went out and you were going to live out this new narrative, I respond. I don't have to get reciprocation back immediately, because that would be a new story. And if you were to write a new story, how many times can you put out the kind of responses that you know are appropriate and useful before you need to have it reciprocate in just the right way?
Probably lots of times. Many times.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like I'm running out of time. Yeah.
So here's another thing, another facet, another one of these, that if we externalize it, not enough time. And does not enough time, does that get you and trick you and recruit you into feeling under pressure or feeling desperate or feeling I've got to do something now?
Yeah.
Okay. So what we're doing is externalizing the old story for the purpose of deframing it. And what we've been doing is taking these constructs and treating them like entities and putting them out there so that you can come up with a strategy to respond to those. And this gives us the ability to come up with a strategy for how to respond to these facets of life more effectively, rather than letting them run the show. And in doing that, what we're doing is then giving the exceptions the chance to become storied in our lives. Think about a time. Has there ever been a time when you offered something and it was reciprocated, whether immediately or a little bit later? So what was that like?
There was the time when the girl flew all the way from Japan to see me.
Okay. So that sounds like a sparkling moment.
Yeah.
Okay. So what if you built your life around that? What if you built your narrative, your story, around that event? What else was in that event that would classify as a sparkling moment?
Just all the intimacy. What if, see what happened is at the end she turned very nasty at the very end of it.
So that's where you go to story that.
Yeah.
Because whatever you story becomes the story, becomes the narrative, becomes the self-organizing attractor.
Yeah, it seemed like the nasty ending cancels out. All the good parts of it.
Do you want it to cancel out the rest?
No.
So if you were to focus on what was good, those sparkling moments that you could let that be the foundation of what you build and how you story it, then how would you create a narrative out of that?
Having experienced some magical times or moments.
Okay. So in building that story, what does that say about you?
Probably if I put myself in the right places, that more of that magic will happen.
Okay. What does that say about the possibilities of it?
That is there.
Okay. What does that say about the kind of person that you're looking for? focus on the sparkling moments.
I get a sense I need to get the fuck out of New York to go somewhere where
Okay.
it's a little more available.
Okay. So there may be some awarenesses as to where to go, where to make yourself available,
Yeah.
and some things to do. And is that the only time that you've ever had that experience where you gave an extended of yourself and you received back something that was delightful, that was good?
No.
Okay. So just for a moment, just kind of scan through all the other times and events where there was that, but somehow you've canceled it before, but now you can make it the foreground and let the other get in the background and foreground all those sparkling moments that if you tied all those together and made a story out of that, then it might be a new story. And as you background what didn't work and hold back what didn't work and treat it as something that you'll just have to deal with, some of those constraints, then it gives you the ability to deal with non-reciprocation, non-connection as just something to deal with, but not the main part of the story, the villains of the story. The villains that you can come up with a strategy to defeat and not let them win the day. Okay. So how does that feel?
Lighter.
Okay.
More hopeful.
So you've been stepping into this new story. So step into that new story even further, and just imagine that this is the story. What would you call the new story?
Fulfillment.
Fulfillment.
Adventurous fulfillment.
Adventurous fulfillment. So now let's just imagine adventurous fulfillment going out into your future. And just day after day, week after week, what would be the resources you would need to make that story even more dramatic, even more fun, even more playful, even more fitting the things that's important to you?
I think part of it would be that ability to pick up and go.
Okay.
To where that's possible, where it's more possible, where it's more accepted.
Okay. So what are the villains of the story that would try to stop you?
Feeling that I had to just stay in New York and build my practice, and I think there was the fear that if I left and went and explored some other countries and cultures, that I wouldn't have as much work, and I would be. It seems like pressures of time where I have to really build a practice, establish myself more solidly to where I could, get a home situated and, buy a house eventually, all that kind of stuff.
So what is that story? When you're playing out all that, what story is going on in your head?
That you have to establish yourself and build your nest, within a certain time frame before you get too old to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where did that story come from?
Society.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you bought into it.
Yeah.
How much of that story is your story?
It feels like I'm kind of forcing myself to because of a belief in a certain limitation of time. You have to do things within a certain time frame.
If you wanted to re-story that, to put a new twist on it, a new story to it, what would be a new story with regard to that?
I don't know if it'd be wishful thinking, but it would be nice to think I could just go wherever, whether I ended up in Europe or India or Brazil or wherever, and that I would somehow make a way and find enough acceptance of my work and in these other places too that I could still succeed and do quite well.
So we could loop back and ask the same kind of questions. Have you ever had even a little bit of that, the sparkling moments that you could build a story that would fit into that?
Mm. Yeah, I've traveled to new places and had good response. You know, like when I first left New Mexico and went to Boston, and I had all these people responding. It was a totally different environment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was good for work, but interpersonally it can suck.
Okay. So what we've been doing is going through this process of looking at the stories that are in our minds and then really taking control over those stories to run our own brains so that we choose our story, and then we choose how to maybe story the sparkling moments, the exceptions that we haven't storied yet, so that we can bring them up into our narrative, and to push away old narratives that have not served us well. And we spend a lot of time fighting those old narratives, because a narrative that is a negative narrative can function like a self-attracting attractor frame at a higher level, and we live in that old story. And if we don't like it, we don't want it, then to externalize it. And so that's that externalizing thing. If we were to call it by a name, what would we call it? And how does it trick us? How does it recruit us? How does it pull us into a narrative that we don't even want to play out anymore? And so we cycle back through this 2 or 3 times, just looking at the story, and it just gives us another way to meditate ourselves and set these kinds of frames and access the kind of resources so that the narrative plot is in our hands. And we can choose to become the actor in the stories that we want to play out. Okay. Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. So this is just the beginning, and obviously we can do a lot more with it, but we start with this process for how to do that. The externalizing is very different from the normal thing we do in NLP with the denominalizing, because actually we're nominalizing. And there's a little story in your text there that I put in there from White and Epstein about the little boy who was brought in by a mother who had a bedwetting problem. My little bedwetter. Of course, this is identification already. And I did this a number of times when I had my practice here in town. I had a couple ladies who brought in their little boys for bedwetting. And so I played the same game. I named and externalized the problem as Sneaky P. Oh, Sneaky P gets you, huh? Sneaky P, do you do this? No, it's Sneaky P who does this to me. And by externalizing it, and then say, okay, let's come up with a strategy to defeat Sneaky P, or do you want Sneaky P to win the day over you? Because what kind of trouble does Sneaky P get you into? And so by framing it that way, and by externalizing it, it can help us to de-story the narrative, and then to find new resources for dealing with that structure. So that's what that externalizing is all about. And we can do that with the MADs. We can do that with the non-connections, the lack of intimacy. And we can, if it was a person that we have to deal with, how would you treat this person? What strategy would you come up so that this does not win the day over you? So you saw the steps, the step-by-step process for this conversation that we begin. And the trick for all of us is that oftentimes, once we're inside the narrative, it just seems so real. We can't see outside that box. And to find those exceptions, to find those sparkling moments, to find the things that have not been narrated, the unstoried, sometimes we have to invite the person to step aside from that story. And do you like this story? Do you want this story? If you weren't in this story, what would be the new story? And what keeps sucking you back into that? So we externalize it and then come up with a strategy so I don't go back in that old story, but I can start creating this new story, and then I can thicken the plot. And it's by asking questions about what would that be like, and what resource would you have? A lot of the as-if frame, what would that be like, and what resources would you have, and how would you be thinking of yourself, and what would you be seeing or hearing or talking, what would be the voice? We thicken the plot, but as we create the script becomes richer and fuller, and we're just writing out a fuller script for how to function and be that way. And then, of course, we can make that distinction between, do you really want this? Or maybe you have to go here. So we can do meta-yesing and knowing then, and then future pace it onto the timeline. So it's just a conversation. So that's why it's not really real. It's just a conversation around the narratives and the stories of our lives, so that we really take charge of those narratives. And this is something we can do very conversationally. It's really not the other kind of pattern, but a narrative pattern.
This pattern, whoa. As my voice gets louder, you'll enjoy what I say more. This pattern will be superb for your March workshop for people who stutter. This just sounds fabulous, because people are thinking back on the moments when they blocked instead of all the moments when they're fluent. And it has
build their lives around that.
All the frames are set around the times when they stutter versus the times when they're fluent. And by changing the story, being able to externalize those moments when they stutter and see that it's not them, it's just that they stuttered and all the meaning frames around it. This just jumped out at me as being just superb.
Okay. I hadn't even thought about it in those terms.
I'm fixing to put it in.
It'll be there tonight.
It'll be on the web tomorrow.
Think of the utilization in your writers' conference workshops.
Yeah, if the story of your life, if your story does include I'm a writer, then you might want to start identifying those sparkling moments when you've written something and start to make that your narrative. Yeah, exactly.
Following on both what Ree and Tim shared, it occurred to me that basically anything that you wanted to become really proficient at, any skill that you wanted to be proficient, and you have a story about your lack of proficiency in, this is a great tool for that. Really a great tool. So it'd be irrespective of, if you wanted to be a public speaker, a good salesperson, whatever. It would be a great way to get out the demons and dragons that happen to be hanging around.
So one way to also think about something to work with in this pattern is, does your narrative support you, those of you in training, does your narrative support you as being a proficient trainer? Does your narrative support you being an excellent coach? Does your narrative support you in taking risks, in being charming, in selling? So does anything you want to be proficient in, does your narrative support it? Do you have a story, or do you need to de-story some other facet where you said, I'm this way, or life is this way, or this can't happen, or however you story that? Because that story, so here's another logical level of the mind, the stories, the narratives that we carry inside our heads.
I have a story that I tell of my life. It's really about my 15 minutes of fame, when I had a period of about 12 years of my life where I just had enormous success, and everything worked, a lot of synchronicity and all of those things. And that ended, and I only like to tell that story. But then I go home and have dreams about, but what are you doing now? And then the other story...
So that's the new story, but.
That's my new story, is the internal story, and that's the one that really holds me back.
Yeah.
Your yes, but holds you back?
Sorry?
Your yes, but holds you back?
Yeah.
It works good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So now as we externalize yes, but has been doing a trip on you, hasn't it?
That's the one. Well, that's what's to do. That's the trip on me.
Yeah. So are you ready to stand up to yes, but?
If I know how, I will do that.
Okay.
What resource do you have access to that will kick that butt? Now.
Humor. I'll think on that.
One of the wonderful things in brief therapy and narrative therapy, and I did this for a number of years with clients, I would get a certificate. And so once a person had achieved something, and sometimes before they did, I would have this certifies that so-and-so has kicked the butt of yes, but and is no longer under the domination and submission of that, but now has the rights and privileges to live out the new story of delightful success.
Yes, and I will.
And so I would type all that, get all that, and I would say we're going to give this to you in a couple more weeks. And so the certificate, the acknowledgement, the award is also part of what narrative therapists do. And so sometimes giving it at the end, sometimes holding out as this is where you're going, and finding something like that. But it helps to concretize and objectify so that we can do something about these feelings that we've narrated.
When I was 5 years old, there was a priest gave a sermon about needing to suffer, or else you're going to go to hell. If you don't suffer as Jesus Christ suffered on the cross, you're going to go to hell and burn for all eternity. And it's taken me a long time to turn the corner on that. But I have about 20 years worth of tapes, journal. And I've been thinking about, I could use that for writing, but the danger is I could go in and go through all this stuff again. And I don't know how I could do that without going through all this stuff.
So if you read it from a meta point of view, this is where that younger me was, as also seeing it through the filter of it's kind of a sad story, but you can see it through the eyes and see it as a sad story, something that's kind of pitiful, rather than being recruited by it. That's why this recruiting question is really important. What keeps seducing you back into the old story? And when you can name it, it's like naming the demon, it's like naming the dragon. When you can name what recruits you. So as you think, what would recruit you to step back into that old story of those 20 years of those journals?
And then in the novel, that would be the turning point of the novel.
Yeah. So what would recruit you? What thought, what emotion would recruit you to step back in?
I don't know. In actual, I don't know what triggers.
So what do you feel when you step back in?
Depression.
Okay, so depression recruits you.
Don't want to do anything.
So think about this. Depression recruits you. Depression has done a trick with you, hasn't it? Are you going to keep putting up with depression?
No.
You want to come up with strategies to deal with depression?
Yes.
So who's going to win the game, depression or you?
Me.
So now we've externalized it. And by calling it depression, and if you can give it funnier names, welcome to my hell. Do you want to deal with putting welcome to my hell? So let's come up, because welcome to my hell recruits you. Come, enter into the journal again. And as you come up with strategies for dealing with welcome to my hell, eventually we'll give you a certificate. This certifies that David has defeated welcome to my hell, and now has all the rights and privileges to write a best-selling book based upon the seductions of welcome to my hell.
Titled Welcome to My Hell.
Farewell, my hell.
Farewell, my hell. Farewell, my hell. So this is the structure of what we're doing, playing with it, and it may take a little getting used to externalize something and treat it like an entity, because it's a process we usually don't use in NLP. Since we tend to denomalize it and turn it back into action, we're going to turn it into entity so we can deal with it and come up with strategies.
That's what we do with the dragon metaphor, right?
In some ways, that's what we do with the dragon metaphor, because sometimes it's too conceptual just to turn it back into actions. So let's go ahead and turn it into a dragon. Let's turn it into an entity and deal with it. And then we have an easier way of representing what we're dealing with.
Naming the frame.
Naming the frame. Naming the game. Ooh, we're almost at lunchtime, so we can't do this before lunchtime. Other questions about this process of, because you may have like Linda and Tim were thinking about other applications of this and how to do this process. When I found this a number of years ago, the narrative therapy and the different processes involved in here, and then using it in a linguistic timelining process, and think about the stories I've lived and the stories that I'm sick and tired of living. And I'm not going to do that story again. End of story. End of plot. It didn't end the way I wanted it to, so I'm just going to invent a new story and then start playing around. What story would you like to be living out of? And what narrative could you start telling? Because in one way, that's why this is hypnotic. What narrative do I want to tell myself that when I play this narrative, I mean, it's a new narrative to play the genius game narrative. I'm going to be able to turn on, turn off personal mastery and genius. And that's a whole new narrative. So you can do that. But the stories we tell, the stories you tell people when you meet them in the hotel, the stories you tell when you move through life and back to your own environment, the stories you tell are very, very powerful because they're metastates, they're metaframes, and they create a canopy of consciousness and an attractor. And that's why we introduce it here, because they do operate like an attractor in a self-organizing system. So be careful the stories you tell. And if you haven't got sparkling moments in those things, or if the story is not a story that you want to be the actor in, the star in, then maybe it's time to restory and destory.
Michael, when you future pace, do you future pace it only linguistically, or do you also do it physically?
Well, you can do it any way, but of course, because we've said this is a kind of a conversational linguistic one, that this becomes something that you can do over the phone, you can talk to people about, you can just ask questions about. And it's interesting, the questions you ask about those sparkling moments are really interesting. So as with Ben asking, has there ever been a time, at first, sometimes it's hard to go there. And then, of course, you can test them. So there's never been a time when you even had just a little bitty bit of something. And that's what we want to get. We want to get that, fan it, let it grow, let it become stronger, use the as-if frame. What if that was even twice as much? And, of course, what we're doing is just creating a better map from that little sparkling of an event. And the presupposition is that you've had sparkling little moments of all kinds of wonderful things, from fun and humor and a sense of mastery and a sense of connection and a sense of intimacy. We've had little moments of it, and all we need to do is to narrate it into a story, and then ask the resource question: what resources do I need to make this real? And what beliefs would support this even more? And what values, what understandings? And so then we just use everything else we have in neurosemantics just to empower this even more. And what do you need to say no to that you're not going to get recruited to play those old games, those old narratives anymore? And so this gives us a way of changing those narratives. The narratives is kind of like that cultural frames. These narratives are so unconscious. We just assume them. And that's the trick, and that's how the old narrative keeps tricking us. Go play that again, because I've never known anything else. It's always this way. And of course that just strengthens the old story and pulls us back in.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to do that. I was thinking that in a way the narratives switch our brain to go places.
Exactly.
And it's like a hypnotic script we have not written consciously.
Yeah.
What we were doing this morning. So.
Yeah. It's an unconscious script that just keeps on playing in that narrative, and oftentimes we just don't recognize how powerful those stories are. And so there's cultural stories. There's the stories of people in our family are like this, and there's a narrative, there's a script, and we just hear that, and we forget the lost performer that says who. And forget all the other structures that's in that, and so the narratives that we've grown up with.
Let's give you another hit. Where families have had a history of a certain type of illness or disease, the narrative that goes around that and being able to activate that and make it different.
I was going to say exactly the same thing. And the people who say, well, this runs in my family. How specifically does it run in your family? I mean, to what degree? Do we all have to live with that ailment? And then, if they see that someone that someone has died from this disease, then they can just see that it's going to take them in the future. Yeah. It's a great way to use this.
So when we come back from lunch, we will come into the room. You might want to find your partner now, and we'll just have a conversation. And how long do you think? 15 minutes each? 15 minutes each. So we'll do 15 minutes each from 1:45. So that'll put us over to 2:15 when we will reconvene back here. So 1:45 to start that, and Jim will blow the whistle at 2 o'clock to switch partners, and 2:15 we'll reconvene back here and give you a chance to look at the narratives of your life and do this linguistic timeline. So see you at 1:45. So how did the linguistic timelining go? Okay. How did you find the externalizing some facet that had been storied and to externalize it and destory it? How did that go? Didn't quite want to let go.
Yeah, I wanted to stay there and go back.
Okay. Okay. Let's get the microphone.
One of the problems that I think we have with that, with the exercise maybe, or I talk of myself.
No, I'm not following.
Okay. One of the problems might be the concept of reality. The concept of reality, because even though we are acquainted with the non-Aristotelian thought, in the back of our mind we yet might think that well, that's my reality. I am playing games in my head, but I mean, this is just a game, and that's reality. This is a brainwash thing, or I mean.
So we set up. That's why we set up the original thing to say there are events that you storied and there's events you haven't.
Yeah.
Because we're not going to take anything that is not real. We're going to take things that have been real to you, but you haven't storied them. That way, we don't have to fool the brain, have to play a game with the brain. It's just something unstoried. So that's why we find those sparkling moments in experience, in reality. So has there ever been a time when that didn't happen? And then we start mapping from there to story that. That way, in that way we don't have to go there. We don't have to go and be, doing that kind of a thing. So, as long as you're in the story, a lot of times we can't see the unstoried because it's been decommissioned. It's been eliminated. It doesn't make any sense inside the old story. And so, just like a state dependency, we can't see and hear and feel and perceive it even when we're in that state. And that's why asking about naming the story, what is the narrative, what is the theme, who storied you, how did the story, do you like it, quality controlling it, that helps us to get a little distance from it to realize it's just a narrative we've created. And it has no more reality than what we have narrated it into being. And then we can start looking at where are the exceptions, where are the differences, and map those sparkling moments into a new story.
I was having this problem with being afraid of my past and not wanting to dwell on it. And I don't like that. I want to be comfortable telling that story,
sure,
a good story. So I created a timeline that has a mirror image. And on the mirror image, I have the resources. And that's the good story. And the other story is still on the other side. So
okay.
From now on, when I go back and do anything like that, I'm going to put it on my timeline. Once on the dysfunctional side, the other on the good side, and I'll be able to comfortably tell either story. I don't have to be afraid of either one.
Right.
But what I want to do when I'm thinking and working, and I need to go back for some information to gradually start going back on the good side of the timeline and pulling the information there on an unconscious level.
Okay. Yeah, to not be afraid of our past. I mean, when you think about the structure of to be afraid of our own past and afraid of our memories, and this is where the framework that the past does not exist except as we remember it and as we encode it, and it will naturally go away unless we refresh it. So a lot of times when we take the meaning away, and it doesn't mean that to us anymore, it gets de-energized, and after a while, we easily forget anything that's not so important. We even forget important things, but we easily forget non-important things because we just don't notice it. We don't punctuate into reality. We don't give it any meaning. So as we turn the meaning down and it has less and less significance, then it's easier to welcome it in because we recognize it truly as just a map and just our encoding of it. And the fear of it actually gives it meaning that it's really significant. And the paradox is it makes it more solid to us, more real. So even that meta state, that one little switch of welcoming it in, because it's what we've been through, but it's not existing anymore. And while I gave it certain meanings with my mind, I don't have to give it those meanings anymore. I can give it new and more resourceful meanings. Then we don't have to be afraid of our past.
I found that when I write things down, like a belief or something, and then I look at it, it's just to actually write it down and to look at what came from my mind allows me to swish it out a lot faster than just talking about it.
It externalizes. That's one aspect of externalizing because now it's written down there. So anything that externalizes helps us to get distance from it. So writing it down and having that awareness that as I write that down, that's what I did think, and that is something I did think. But that's not. I'm more than that. I'm more than that writing.
Michael, can we have multiple narratives? I mean, multiple stories about the same issue, and choose the one who serves of us well in a certain moment?
Sure. Yeah. Because one of the things we do as we move through the world, we do create multiple mappings of it, and some of it is dependent on the state we're in at a given time. But some of the maps I have are the maps that other people have told me that I've brought in, and I have their map about it as well. So one elicitation with this particular pattern is, what is the story that your mom gave you? What is the story that your dad gave you? What is the story that some teacher gave you? What is the story that your brother gave you? And just going through looking at some of the other maps that's in our heads. In the re-imprinting pattern, sometimes we have to do some re-imprinting with even perpetrators because we've internalized that perpetrator. And sometimes we're switching roles. One of the things I like in brief psychotherapy, they talk about the internalized other. And I played around with that when I was still doing some couple therapy. A couple would come in, let's say Susie and Larry. And I would say, Larry, you've got Susie in your head. You've got a map of Susie, what she's about, what she wants. Tell me about Susie. And so as he would tell me about Susie, we would put that out and say, Susie, need to update any of this? Susie, you've got Larry internalized inside you. Tell me what Larry wants. Tell me what Larry's about. Tell me what he cares about. What's his hurt? What's his vulnerabilities? What's his strength? What's his passions? What does he really want? And so she would, but oftentimes those are maps that are real fragmented, and they're just bits and pieces. So as she would tell me this, Larry, you want to help her update some of this? So, will the Larry inside you speak to me? Will the Susie inside you speak to me? And it's talk about a trance phenomenon. All you have to do is set a little frame. You know, when you go to work, you remember Larry, don't you? When you go visit your mom, you still remember Larry. Larry's kind of in there. You know what Larry would think, and you know what Larry would feel. Will the Larry inside you come out and speak to me now? And it's funny. we've got these internalized others inside of us that we carry around. You still got your dad inside. You still got your mom inside. Will the dad of you, will you come out and speak to me? Well, sometimes we deal with the map that way. Because sometimes, because we ask the question in NLP, whose voice is that? And sometimes we say, well, that's Dad's voice. Or that's Mom's voice. Or that's Uncle John's voice. So these are those internalized maps or stories or narratives or representations that we have of someone else, and it's not even ours. And so being able to recognize that and to have some method to deal with it. And there are several methods. This is just one technology that we can use to deal with it. But yeah, we can have multiple stories about the same thing, multiple perspectives.
And after doing the exercise, can we do more than one story about the same thing also? I mean, new stories, 10 new stories, and whatever I choose, depending on the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So part of what we do, what you do every single morning in the coaching groups, when you identify, here's the outcomes I want for today, for this week, for this month, for my life this year, for the next few years. What are the outcomes? You're really telling yourself a story, kind of a journey story, an adventure story, is where do I want to go and who do I want to become and how do I get there and what are the resources I need to be able to live out this story. And story is just a larger linguistic pattern because it's not just a word, not just a sentence, not just a paragraph, but it's kind of a whole script. And what's in that story and how do we play out that story and so then it becomes a larger level frame that we build. So we can do lots of different pieces to it that helps to build up that whole story to make the story consistent and useful and fulfill our values, our visions, our hopes.
So in my case, when I have a very positive story that I really like to tell because it puts me in a high state, my problem with it is the meaning that I have and the story about that meaning. So I see what I need to do is develop a new story about what it means.
Right. Yeah, a new story about what it means. So a lot of psychological models, if we think about them as stories, Erik Erikson had the psychosocial stages of human development. Here's a story. Here's a story of growth and development through the psychosocial stages as we move through different stages of life, needing to deal with certain facets, whether it's autonomy, whether it's trust, whether it's achievement, whether it's a sense of legacy. And so if we look at that theory as a story about how people grow up and experience their life, then asking what is the overall story that I'm living out, that becomes the plot, the narrative, the characters that's within.
What are some specific examples you've seen of where you shifted someone, their story, and how their actual behavior changed and the type of events and experiences they attracted and created in their life? Can you describe?
Probably the biggest one that I've seen, and the one that I used to use as much as anything when I used this in a therapeutic format, was moving from victim to architect of my own life. I mean, what a difference in story and the story of most children. It's easy for a child to feel like life happens to me and just to receive the story, and then to live in that story of just being a victim and passive of it to changing that story to where I am the architect, I get to choose, it's my thoughts and feelings and emotions. And so that's the biggest one I've seen. I worked with one fellow who was a child of an alcoholic family, and he had gone through his own drug period and his own alcoholism, trying to cope with the family because his family life was fairly dysfunctional, dad yelling a lot. And so then he'd gone to Alcoholics Anonymous, and so they had given him a story. They had given him the story, once you're alcoholic, you're always alcoholic. They give him the story that once you grow up in a dysfunctional family, you will be struggling with this the rest of your life. This was the story they gave him. So when I heard that story and did some quality control, do you like that? Do you believe that? Is that who you want to do, to over-identify with that? And so as he started developing a different story, that's just something I went through. That was the story I gave him, or the frame. It's just something you went through. Are you through it now? Or do you need to go through it again? and to what extent, and when will you know that it's done? When can you close the door? So when he started buying into that story, okay, we've closed the door. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do with your life? And all of a sudden he realized that he really loved languages. But his dad told him that it'll go to his head and that it's dangerous and he'll become a snobbish intellect. Because his dad hated snobbish intellects. That was his story. Well, this guy had a natural gift for language. So he went to the college here, learned Russian, wanted to become a translator. So once he could close that door and then decide that the story of his life could be, I can follow my passions. And so some of it was giving him permission to have that story, giving him permission to... Because he constantly asked me, is it okay? And when we think about the frames that is presupposing, he was still looking for a father figure. He was still looking for somebody to father him. And so one of the other things I did with that was, at first I would say it's okay. I would give him that permission. Then a little bit later on, I said, do you need permission from me? You know, you could finish your own fathering. You could be the parent that you never had. And gave him that story, that frame to go do that.
Now, how did your own behavior change when you came out of the victim stance? What was different in your life? What specifically?
I never lived that story.
Oh, okay.
For myself personally. Now, what he did, his different was, there came a point when he was still living at home, and he was in his late 30s. Because his story was, you know, and he kept saying this, blood is thicker than water. I said, what's that supposed to mean? What is that supposed to mean? Well, to him it meant he had to be more true and trust his family rather than a stranger. I said, well, how are you going to meet anybody? You're not going to marry your cousin, are you? This is going to degrade the gene pool. You know, what is this? And so, but once he did, he moved out. Then he went to school, and he stopped looking to his dad. He was still looking to his dad at 38 years old to father him. I said, I'm sorry to inform you, but it's about over. You know, childhood is about over. and as he gave all that, I said, make a list. What is characteristic for your dad? So he started making a list, and I took this list and I put it back. Do you expect this person to parent you? So he had to, you know, that was that closing that door. When you're going to close that door? And when he closed the door, then he moved out. He went back to school. He started following his passion. He started doing the things that were appropriate for him and that would be true, and gaining his own resources. So that was the shift from being a victim to all of that and feeling like he was doomed and destined and fated for it, to where he decided to become the architect of his own future.
Mm-hmm. I have an example of a more cultural story. Maybe you could work on that a bit. In New York City, many of the women in the city have a mentality that it's dangerous, you can't open up, you have to be introduced. More of a victim stance. They see themselves as prey and then as predators.
And then as predators.
Yeah. And so many times where two people connect and there's an initial good experience, they'll go home and their friends, their family members, roommates are going to reinforce the destructive, negative story. How would you begin to deframe that story specifically?
Well, the deframing would involve identifying any plot, any script, any facet of the story that really doesn't serve us well. And part of the deframing is just naming it. What do we call this? What's going on? What's the script? What's the intention of this particular way of functioning or acting? Mm-hmm. What are we trying to accomplish by that? So that helps to deframe it some. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, always stepping out and asking, does this enhance my life? Does this empower us as a couple or as a group, or mm-hmm. and running that quality control, mm-hmm. and then kind of doing the checking of frame by implication, what's implied by these frames, mm-hmm. and then checking that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, Bob, you had something you wanted to.
I just encourage you to listen to what Dr. Hall just said. If the population would hear that, most of us therapists would go out of business. To spend our adult lives waiting on mom and daddy to be the mom and daddy we wanted and felt like we needed, I came to the conclusion 10 years ago was a height of stupidity, and I utterly refused to live it anymore. And when I made that decision, good things started happening. We can't go back. We're adults. Own our own brains, run our own brains, forgive mom and dad, look for the good things in our life, go on. Solve the vast majority of problems that we face.
Every one of the logical levels that we've looked at, beliefs, values, identity, understanding, decision, pleasure, expectation, culture, and now story, every one of those words, they're just words, but they're meta-level words, they're meta-phenomenon, and of course within each one is each one, and yet each one gives us another facet of how to look at experience. If this was a story, what story is it? If this was a narrative, what's the plot, who's the character, what are they trying to do, what's the nature of the story? Same thing with beliefs or value, something of importance, identity, that each just gives another facet. And so with this whole narrative thing, we now have yet another facet of how to look at something, and sometimes one of these terms will be more useful and empowering and elicit new kind of information that we can then do some restoring. I find that linguistic timelining is a nice way at a conversational level to start talking about some of these things without doing a formal pattern or formal trance. But it will be very trancey as we ask these kinds of questions. What is the story that you've been living? Do you like this story? Who storied you? And if you had a magic wand and could have a different story, what would be that new story? And if you're going to write a script for that, how would that script go? And who would be the players? And where would you play this out at? And so that then becomes a way, especially like the phrase, the sparkling moments. What are these sparkling moments that you didn't notice all that much? And so we find those as exceptions to the other story, and we thicken that plot. We enrich that by asking questions. And that's how we bring it into a story form. I think the other day we were talking about dreams and how that some cultures in the Pacific Ocean really value dreams. And so when people wake up in the morning and start talking about the dreams, well, if you think about that from a language standpoint, they are languaging that and bringing that into the narrative of life. What did you dream about? And did you conquer that bear? Well, next time you see that bear, you can't swell up in yourself and face that bear. And so when the child will do that, then we celebrate. We cheerlead that they did that. And of course, that's just helping the narrative to be enriched around that. And same thing with what we're doing here. We're really narrating a new story and a new direction. And so that was the structure of what this last piece was about. We've all had times and moments when we experience another kind of psychological time, and that is when time stood still or when time slowed down. And probably one of the nicest experiences we've all had is when we're on the interstate or a freeway, motorway, and we're driving along, and then we come off on a ramp and it says 30 miles an hour, and we start slowing down. But it doesn't feel like 30 miles an hour. It feels like just crawling when you've been doing 70 or 80 or 90. It just feels like it takes forever. And it feels like it slows down. Slow time is a feeling that things are moving slowly. We've had dreams where we feel almost paralyzed, and we're just barely moving around. And the opposite, another great place where time moves slowly. You go to some fast food restaurant and there's a big queue there, and you're standing there, and it feels like it takes forever. Then there's been the opposite, fast time, and you've been doing something. You look down, 3 hours, and you look back up and you look down, 3 more hours. And it's like we have the sense that it just zoom by, because whatever we were involved in, we weren't measuring time at all, and time got away. So the feeling of fast and slow time are two psychological time states that if we had more control and management over it, we could slow time down with some experiences. And we could speed time up with other experiences. We could have more of a sense of because your brain is doing it. The feeling of time going slow or time going fast is a feeling, and it's a feeling that you create in your body. So it's psychological time. It's not really happening. It just feels like it's really happening. One time when time slows down, and this is time slowed down, which is probably bad time, is when all of a sudden every eye in the whole room looks at you and expects something to come out of your mouth just now, and it's like, and time slows down. Well, what we want to do is to get some instances in our history of good slow time and good fast time so that we can anchor it. Because if it's a feeling, it could be anchored. It could be kinesthetically anchored. And then we could feel that. So the diagram we have up here is fast and slow time. When we are moving fast through time, or when time itself is moving fast and slow. And let's see, the world of events is that that faces us on that cube, and then going when the self is going fast and slow versus when the world of events is going fast and slow. So facing that that face of the cube, we've got at the very bottom there, when self is going slow, and we're just feeling like everything is going so slow, and the events of the world is also going slow, and it's like it's the eternal moment. If you saw the Star Trek movie, and I don't know which one it is, 5 or 6, or maybe 17 or 34, one of those Star Trek, where Captain Kirk, they meet this planet where this high technological society has decided to go back and just live more simply. And there's a woman there, and she slows time down. And she has that eternal perfect moment. And Jean-Luc Picard is there, and this flower opens. And Jean-Luc Picard says, "How do you do that?" And she talks about the perfect moment when everything just holds still just for a moment, and it's like you're caught, suspended in time and space. Well, that's what the eternal moment is. When you're just there, and it's delightful, and you're slow, and the time is slow, and it's delightful. Over in that bottom quadrant, number 4 there, in country time, you have a sense that you're moving fast, but everything else is moving slow. So the world is moving slow, but you have the sense that you're moving really quick. And it's like you've come from the city into the country. And everything is moving slow, but you're just so quick. Which, that would be a great place and a great state to have playing baseball. You know, everything's moving slow, and you're just because you're moving much quicker. Or if you're doing martial arts, and you're just dancing around them. Kind of like the end of the Matrix. The Agent Smith is going real fast, and Neil is just doing this. His sense of it is just ease, and he even puts his hand behind his back just with one hand. And the agent is just doing as much as he can. So it's the sense of us being fast and the world going slow. In quadrant 1, it's in city time, and we're going slow and the world's going fast. It's like going to New York City. Not a pleasant place to be, but exciting. Because the world's just going really fast. And it's like when you first come into NLP and you walk into a strategy class, and somebody's up there going through a strategy and say, "Did you see the eyes?" And so everybody's saying, "Well, the eyes went over here and did this and then did this," and you're going, "I didn't see that." And you're just caught there in slow time, the self going slow. In quadrant 2, with the world going fast and you going fast, this is type A behavior. It's exciting time and movement because we're moving fast, the world's moving fast. And so that's that first set of blocks. The backside of that is when it's unpleasant. And so in the internal moment, if it's in a place where this is not fun, and you're moving slow, and the demon is moving slow, and it's going to get you, and you know so, and it's moving slow, and the snakes are coming. So we call that nightmare time. So the front part is positive, the back part is negative. In city time, when everything's going really fast, it can be exciting if it's the first time to the city. But if you go there and it's really stressful, then it's stress time. And then Bob has, at the top there, quadrant B, the back part is rush to overdrive. And then quadrant 4B is in overdrive when we're really fast and everything's moving slow. So here's a way of kind of sorting out some of the different qualities of fast and slow time. And fast and slow time can offer us some resources, because what if you were fast and the world was going slow and you were practicing a skill? What if you did that in your mind when you have time, when you're riding on a subway, when you're riding a bus, when you're waiting in line, and you know the skill, you know how to go through it, so you go through the skill real fast while the world goes slow. So we could how many times could you go through the practice? So fast time, slow time, two states, and we're just going to go through this pattern and play with this and see if we can get this anchored. So who would like to work with me, and I'll see if we can elicit these states and get these anchored. Fast time, slow time.
Get somebody else.
Okay. Yeah, you were up yesterday, so let's see if we can get somebody else who hasn't been up in a while. Okay. Yeah, just anywhere on the... So this is on page 74. And I'm going to skip that first. Actually, we're going to start on step number 2, accessing states of fast and slow time. What I'm going to do is use your arm and anchor fast and slow time. So that, does it feel better when we have more and more confidence going this way, or more and more confidence going this way?
Up. Going
up. So I'm going to have fast time going here and slow time going down. So the faster the time will go and the slower time will go. And so what I'd like you to do is to think about some time when time has just stood still for you. Like coming off of a freeway, like standing in line, like waiting and waiting, but we want it to be a good time. We don't want it to be a negative slow time, but time went slow, and it just seemed like it crawled along. Okay. So as you see that, one of the things really interesting about looking at slow time is noticing as you look at your picture and as you see what you saw then and everything, notice if there's any part of the picture that's going at a different speed than another part.
Do you want me to express what the context is, or?
If you want to.
Okay, it's a work when I'm sitting in the ER talking to some of the staff.
Okay.
I don't notice any part of the picture moving faster than the other elements.
So how do you know it's going slower? How does it feel that time is going slower?
People are saying, boy, it's taken, it's a slow night.
Okay.
Things like that.
Okay.
It just seems like it's going on forever.
Okay. And so notice how you know that. And you may not be able to put that in words, but somehow inside you have a sense of it's just going slow.
Yeah, there's not a lot going on.
Okay. And so notice what has to be true in your picture for you to know that, because there has to be a comparison between what could go on but what's not.
People are moving slower. Some are just sitting around talking, having coffee.
Okay.
That sort of thing.
So notice what that feels like on the inside, and when your body is going slower, that sense of slow time. Okay. And let's contrast that with fast time. Let's think about a time when everything's just really moving fast. So much is happening, and it feels inside your body that things are moving really quick. And notice how you represent that, how you know that. Maybe notice the internal dialogue here.
Yeah, people are running around, things are happening, a lot's going on.
Okay, notice the tension in your body, the breath in your body. That when it's fast, it's going really, really fast. Okay, so
people look stressed.
Okay, so a lot of content information. Okay, so there'll be the content, and look at the structural facet, the quality of the pictures or the movement in the pictures, how big the pictures are, how close they are to you, and then what it's doing to you kinesthetically, muscle tension, breath, your own movement, and contrast that to slow time. Contrast that to the quality of the pictures, the size of the pictures, what it's doing to you kinesthetically on the inside. When time slows down, goes really slow.
Picture's a little more fuzzy.
Okay.
And it's a little farther away.
Okay. So in first of all, accessing these two states and getting these elicitations, we're getting your awareness of those two things. And step number 3 there, that's our second step, really is what we've already done with the qualities of it, the submodalities, the qualities of each of these two things. And so what we want to now do with that slow time is maybe, because you know what this feels like and what this is like, let your unconscious mind just kind of drift back through your memories at other times when you felt this, other past pleasant times when things were slow and just really slowing down, and maybe some pleasant times when you enjoyed it going slow. Just notice that, and then any other structural facets, any of these cinematic features of the submodalities, what that was like.
It's less movement.
Okay.
It's almost like still pictures.
Okay. And then just search through and let your unconscious mind search through for times of a fast time, when things really went quickly, and pleasant fast time, when it wasn't so much stressful, but it was a lot of fun, that it went fast. It was moving really quick. Maybe going into a movie, and it seemed like it was just over so quickly, and you came out. And it just moved very quickly, and it was pleasant, and it's delightful. Okay.
Like winning a football game.
Okay. Okay. So we want to anchor those two, and then the next one is juxtaposing the time to specify those differences, and I think you've got some of those differences now between those two. And we've anchored it. That's number 6 there, anchoring slow and fast time. Number 7 is finding something you'd like to apply this to, and we won't have to invite. You can keep this private. You can keep this secret. The slow time. As you think about your future, moving in the days and the weeks to come, there may be experiences you'd like to feel this about and slow the experience down. So when you think of something, feel this, and apply all of this state to that. And then just enjoy it as you slow it down to enjoy each and every moment. And so positive slow, you could even slow it down more. Slow it down more so that you can enjoy it more and more. And if your brain can do that, then there are other experiences you might like to just get over quicker and do so in a pleasant way, and you can feel this about those. That you just don't notice time, it just goes. And feeling this about some of those experiences.
I do that quite often anyway.
Okay.
When I'm working long hours, I go into kind of a time warp and lose track of time.
Okay.
But it's that last hour, sometimes you have a shift. It's like it slows back down.
And that slows down.
Yeah.
But now you can do this. Just feel this about that.
Speed it up all the way through.
Okay. Okay. So in applying that, that's what we've done, speeding that up, slowing that down. And of course what we're doing is slowing time itself, your sense of time, down for pleasant, and speeding it up for those things you'd like to speed it up. This now gives us the ability to do some particular things with it, because there may be times that have gone so slow that you want to go faster, times when it seems like you got a lot of time on your hand. And with a lot of time on your hand, one of the things you could do is to think about some skills or patterns that you'd like to play with and experience. And so while you do that, time can be passing while you're just slowly going through those patterns.
So time is passing faster?
And time is passing because you're so involved in the moment with those patterns.
Yeah, I do that.
Okay. And then we can speed you up so that you can have that sense of just zooming through those patterns, going faster and faster.
That's a little different.
Okay.
Yeah, never thought of that one.
Okay.
Yeah, I connect doing patterns with going slow.
Okay, so fast and slow time. You did that very easily.
I think with the anchor, yeah, you can do it.
Quickly.
Whatever.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you. So it's mostly a lot of elicitation to get the representations and then set up a sliding anchor so that you can have fast and slow time. And of course, once you have it, then there's lots of things we can do with it in terms of application. But the main thing is that when I've noticed my representations for fast and slow time, it is kind of strange. And I think most of you will find that there will be different speeds of different facets of the pictures. Or some of the picture may be fuzzy and some is clear, that there may be zooming in, zooming out, making something a foreground, making something a background, that there'll be a lot of kind of weird things going on in the movie when you find fast and slow time. Because somewhat by definition there's some distortion going on somewhere, and it'll show up sometimes at the auditory. Sometimes there'll be a misalignment between the pictures and the words or the sounds, or the rhythm will change, the tone will change, the speed, tempo of the auditory will change. That there will be different changes. Kinesthetically, there's going to be significant changes between fast and slow time, and so to have the person access those, anchor those, and then we can apply them, and then start choosing where would you like to slow time down. Well, let's play. 10 minutes each. So how did that go? Did you get an anchor for fast and slow time? Okay. Okay.
Using it to speed read is tricky because you have to keep adjusting, depending on content and how fast you can absorb the information. So that's...
Yeah. I've never applied it to reading.